Her family forced her to marry in her sister's place. The millionaire discovered the truth too late. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had been falling since dawn, steady and cold, turning the front yard of the Evans family estate into a sea of mud. Inside, the air was thick with whispers and the rustle of silk. Clara Evans stood in front of the mirror, her fingers trembling as her mother fastened the final button on the ivory wedding gown. The gown was not hers. It belonged to her sister Evelyn, the daughter their parents always spoke of with pride. The perfect one, the chosen bride. But Evelyn had vanished the night before the wedding, leaving only a letter and a trail of shame. "You will take her place," her father said, his voice like a gavel striking wood. "The contract with the Grant family cannot be broken. We owe them everything." Clara had tried to protest, but his eyes cold, desperate, afraid of losing the only chance to save their collapsing business, silenced her. Outside, the church bells began to toll. She stepped into the limousine, her hands gripping the bouquet so tightly that a petal broke loose. Every mile toward St. Andrew's Church felt heavier than the last. When the car stopped, the rain softened to a mist. Flashbulbs exploded like tiny bursts of lightning as reporters shouted questions she could barely hear. Her veil trembled. Her breath did too. Inside the grand marble aisle stood Ethan Grant, the man she was about to marry. He was taller than she remembered from the engagement dinner, where she had been nothing more than a shadow at her sister's side. His expression was unreadable, carved from steel. The heir of Grant Holdings, a millionaire groom known for his discipline and lack of sentiment. When Clara reached the altar, he leaned close enough for her to hear the low timbre of his voice. "You are late," he said without emotion. She swallowed hard. "I am sorry." He did not answer. The priest began to speak, words echoing in the vaulted ceiling. Vows, promises, lies. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, his touch was brief, almost clinical. She whispered the words she had memorized overnight. "I do." Outside, the thunder rolled across the sky like applause from another world. The ceremony ended. The cameras flashed again. Her mother smiled, relief masking fear. To everyone watching, it was a perfect wedding wealth, elegance, destiny fulfilled. But inside the limousine back to the Grant mansion, silence fell heavy between bride and groom. Ethan finally spoke, eyes fixed on the window. "This marriage will last 3 months. After that, we part ways. You will have everything your family was promised, and I will have fulfilled my father's will." Clara turned toward him, stunned. 3 months? He nodded once. "A contract, nothing more." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to answer. "Then let us keep it professional." "Oh." Their eyes met in the reflection of the rain-streaked glass, two strangers bound by duty, pretending to be something they were not. Outside, the city lights blurred into gold and gray. Inside, beneath layers of silk and silence, a storm of fear and fate began to rise. Neither of them knew it yet, but this false beginning would lead to the most real thing either of them had ever known. The limousine stopped in front of the Grant mansion, a vast white stone estate surrounded by iron gates and flickering lanterns. Clara stepped out, the hem of her gown brushing against the wet pavement. Her breath misted in the cold evening air as she looked up at the grand house. It was beautiful, but it felt like a prison built of marble and silence. Ethan walked ahead of her, without a word. The door opened automatically, revealing a foyer larger than her entire family home. A chandelier hung above them like a frozen storm of crystal. A butler appeared, bowing slightly, before saying, "Welcome home, Mr. Grant, madam." Clara forced a smile and followed Ethan inside. He turned briefly, his tone polite but distant. "You will have your own room at the East Wing. Dinner is served at 7 o'clock sharp. Attendance is expected." She nodded. "Understood." He gave a faint nod and disappeared up the staircase, his footsteps fading into the high ceiling. When the butler led her to the guest room, she paused at the doorway. The room was elegant, trimmed with ivory drapes and soft light, but cold. Every piece of furniture seemed untouched, arranged for display rather than comfort. Clara set down her bouquet, now wilting, and exhaled for the first time that day. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. She looked like someone else: painted lips, perfect curls, a stranger wearing her sister's dress. She whispered under her breath, 3 months. I can survive 3 months. Downstairs, the clock chimed 7. She straightened her posture and walked toward the dining hall. The long mahogany table was set for 2. Candlelight flickering between silver dishes. Ethan was already seated, reading a file. He did not look up as she entered. She sat opposite him quietly. The silence between them was sharp enough to cut through the clinking of cutlery. Finally, she spoke. I want to thank you for being patient with this situation. He glanced at her. Patient is not the word I would use. Her chest tightened. You think I wanted this either? I think, he said evenly, we are both fulfilling obligations we did not choose. The words stung because they were true. Dinner passed with little more than the sound of rain on the tall windows. When it ended, he stood, folded his napkin, and said, A driver will take you to the foundation office tomorrow morning. My assistant will help you prepare for the public events we must attend as a couple. She looked up, confused. Public events? He finally met her eyes. Appearances matter. My father's board expects a stable image. You will play your role until this contract ends. Clara's fingers curled around the edge of the table. And what about my role as a person? His expression flickered, almost a trace of guilt, before turning to steel again. You agreed to the terms, Miss Evans. Let us not pretend this is something it is not. He left the room. Clara sat there long after the door closed, the candles burning low. Outside, the wind howled through the garden, bending the trees until their branches touched the windows like desperate hands. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. She could hear faint music somewhere in the mansion, a piano. Slow and distant. For a moment, she imagined the notes were trying to reach her, soft enough to say she was not entirely alone. But when the melody stopped, the silence returned, heavy and endless. She turned on her side and whispered to herself, You are not her. You are not Evelyn. You will not let them break you. In the morning, she would learn to smile again. She would walk beside the man who had made her a wife on paper. She would attend luncheons, banquets, and charity events. She would play her role, not for love or ambition, but to protect her family from ruin. What she did not know yet was that each step inside this mansion would pull her closer to the truth, closer to the man behind the contract, and closer to a choice that would shatter the boundaries between duty and desire. The morning came wrapped in pale fog and quiet tension. Clara stood by the window of her room, watching the garden shimmer with dew. Somewhere in the mansion, footsteps echoed and doors opened and closed like clockwork. This was not a home. It was an empire that ran on precision, one heartbeat away from control. At 8 o'clock sharp, a black car waited for her outside. Ethan's assistant, a calm woman named Laura, greeted her politely. Good morning, Madam Grant. We have fittings scheduled at 9 and a lunch meeting with the boardwives at noon. Clara forced a polite smile. Please, call me Clara. Laura nodded once, her professionalism unshaken. Of course, madam. The ride into the city was long and silent. Clara watched the skyscrapers rise like silver walls, her reflection faint in the window. She remembered painting as a child how colors once spoke for her when words failed. Now, even her smile felt borrowed. At the foundation office, photographers and reporters filled the lobby. Ethan stood near the elevator, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. When he saw her, his expression softened for only a second before the mask returned. You are late, he said quietly. The driver had to wait for the press outside the gate, she replied, keeping her voice steady. He nodded once, eyes already scanning the floor plan in his hand. We will attend 3 events this week. At each one, you will remain close, answer questions briefly, and speak only about charity matters. The less personal, the better. Clara raised an eyebrow. So I am decoration now? His eyes met hers, sharp but tired. You are protection. There is a difference. Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened, and the flash of cameras filled the space. Ethan instinctively placed his hand on her lower back, guiding her through the crowd. The gesture was rehearsed, but the warmth of his touch startled her all the same. Inside the boardroom, the meeting began. Investors, reporters, and assistants moved in a careful rhythm around Ethan as he presented the Grant Foundation's new initiative for underprivileged schools. When a journalist asked about his sudden marriage, Ethan did not flinch. "My wife and I share a belief in giving back. That is all there is to say." Clara glanced at him, surprised by the quiet conviction in his tone. For the first time, she saw not the cold businessman from the wedding, but a man shouldering too much and saying too little. After the meeting, they stepped outside into the cool noon air. Reporters shouted questions, but he ignored them, leading her toward the waiting car. The crowd pressed closer, flashes snapping, and one woman yelled, "Mrs. Grant, are you truly in love, or is this a publicity stunt?" Clara froze. Ethan stopped too. He looked at her briefly, then faced the cameras. "Love," he said calmly, "is not for sale." The crowd erupted with questions, but he took her hand and guided her into the car. The door closed, sealing them in silence. Clara's pulse raced. "That line," she said softly, "was very convincing." He stared out the window. It was meant to be. The car moved through the city. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, as they passed a row of old brick shops, she said, "I used to work near here, at a cafe on Main Street. I used to draw customers when business was slow." He turned to her, curiosity flickering. "You draw?" "I used to," she replied. "Not much time for that anymore." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "You should not stop doing the one thing that makes you feel alive." She blinked, startled by the unexpected warmth in his voice. Back at the mansion, she found a sketchbook waiting on her bed. Its cover was new, but inside was a single note written in precise handwriting. "Every empire begins with a sketch." Clara traced the words with her fingertips. She did not need to guess who had left it. That night, while the house slept, she sat by the window with the sketchbook open, drawing the outline of the chandelier from memory. Each line steadied her hands, calmed her thoughts, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt something close to peace. Down the hall, Ethan stood outside her door for a moment, hearing the faint scratch of pencil against paper. He did not knock. Instead, he turned away, unaware that her quiet act of courage had already begun to draw him closer than any contract ever could. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their arrangement settled like dust that refused to leave the air. Clara learned the pattern of Ethan's life, his precise breakfast at 7 o'clock, his meetings stacked hour after hour, his late returns when the rest of the mansion was asleep. She learned when to speak and when silence carried more meaning. Her days were filled with appearances, fittings, and etiquette lessons with Laura, the assistant who had become both guide and quiet guardian. Yet Clara's world began to shift in subtle ways. The sketchbook Ethan had given her never left her side. Each night she filled another page, chandeliers, corridors, the view from the terrace at sunset. It reminded her that somewhere beneath the gowns and the lies, she still existed. One Friday evening, the Grant Foundation hosted a small charity dinner in the mansion's ballroom. The room glittered under crystal lights, filled with polished laughter and the quiet hum of wealth. Clara stood near the entrance, her gown of pale gold shimmering softly. Ethan approached, adjusting his cufflinks. "You look different tonight," he said. She smiled faintly. "Different good or different wrong?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Different beautiful." For a moment the words hung in the air between them. She looked away before he could see her blush. When the guests arrived, the orchestra began to play a slow waltz. A board member's wife asked Ethan to dance, but he declined with a polite smile. Instead, he turned to Clara. "Shall we?" She blinked in surprise. "I'm not sure I remember how." "I will lead," he said simply. Under the warm lights, his hand rested at her waist, her palm against his chest. The first few steps were hesitant, awkward even, but then the rhythm found them. The music rose and softened, and for a fleeting minute the world outside disappeared. As they moved across the marble floor, Ethan's voice dropped low. "You have been doing well, handling the events, the press. You have more strength than you realize." "Oh." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the chandeliers above. "Strength is easier when you have something worth protecting." He studied her face, as if seeing her for the first time. "And what are you protecting, Clara?" "Whatever is left of myself," she whispered. The song ended, but he did not step away immediately. When he finally did, the air between them felt changed, thinner, charged with something unspoken. Later that night, after the guests had left, Clara walked out onto the terrace. The city stretched below, dotted with lights like fallen stars. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Ethan stood there, his tie loosened, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You handled tonight perfectly," he said. She smiled. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised," he admitted. "Proud." The word hit her unexpectedly. No one had said it to her in years. "Thank you," she said quietly. They stood in silence, the night air cool around them. Then Ethan spoke again, his tone distant but sincere. "This arrangement, it was meant to be business, but I keep forgetting that when you are near." Her heart skipped. "Do not say things you do not mean." He met her eyes. "I mean more than I should." Before she could answer, thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of rain. He reached out instinctively, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. For a second, the world shrank to the space between them. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Clara." She watched him leave, her pulse racing. When the rain began to fall, she stayed on the terrace, letting it soak into her gown. Somewhere deep inside, a truth she had tried to bury began to stir. That night, she could not sleep. She sat at her desk, sketching without looking, the lines trembling on the page. It was not the ballroom she drew, nor the mansion. It was Ethan, his hand at her waist, his eyes in the glow of candlelight. When she realized what she had done, she closed the book quickly, pressing her palm over it as if to hide the evidence from herself. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the air clean and heavy with silence. Inside her heart, another kind of storm had just begun. The following week arrived with a rush of preparation for the Grant Foundation's annual gala, the most important event of the year. Every major investor, journalist, and socialite in the city would be there. For Ethan, it was a stage of power. For Clara, it was another test to survive. On the morning of the event, Laura helped Clara into a gown the color of midnight blue. The silk flowed like water when she moved. "You look stunning, madam," Laura said softly. Clara smiled faintly. "It feels like armor." By evening, the mansion was alive with light and music. Luxury cars filled the circular drive, and the air buzzed with conversation. When Clara descended the staircase, the entire room seemed to pause. Ethan stood at the base, wearing a black suit that mirrored the calm power in his eyes. He extended his hand. "Ready?" "As I will ever be," she answered, taking it. For the first hour, everything unfolded smoothly. Ethan introduced her to donors and politicians, his voice even, his composure perfect. Clara followed his lead, smiling when required, answering politely, and hiding the tremor in her chest. Yet, as the night went on, she began to feel the shift in the air. The crowd's attention lingered longer than usual. Whispers followed her movements. Near the grand piano, a woman in a silver dress approached, holding a glass of champagne. Her smile was sharp, her tone sugar-coated. "Mrs. Grant, how lovely to finally meet the replacement bride." Clara froze. "Excuse me?" The woman tilted her head. "Oh, you did not know? Everyone in the room is aware that the first bride, your sister, was it, left a day before the ceremony. Quite the scandal." A murmur rippled through nearby guests. Clara felt her throat tighten. "That is not true," she said quietly, though her voice shook. Ethan appeared beside her in an instant, his presence cutting through the noise. "That is enough," he said firmly. His eyes burned into the woman's. "If gossip is the only contribution you can make, perhaps you should leave." The woman's smile faltered. She muttered an apology and disappeared into the crowd. Clara turned to Ethan, her hands trembling. "They know, Ethan. They all know." "Let them talk," he said. "You have done nothing wrong." But she could see it, the faint muscle in his jaw, the doubt flickering behind his calm mask. He excused himself moments later, saying he had to speak with the chairman. Clara stood alone near the fountain, as laughter echoed from the ballroom. Every word from the crowd felt heavier, sharper, until she could not tell if it was the music or her heart pounding in her ears. Later that night, she found him on the balcony, his hands gripping the railing. "Did you know?" she asked softly. "Did you know what they would say about me?" He turned slowly. "I did not think it would matter." "It matters," she whispered, "because it is true, and I had no choice." "Oh." The silence that followed was colder than the rain beginning to fall again. Ethan's eyes searched hers, but the distance between them felt endless. "Then tell me, Clara, if you never wanted this, why did you stay?" Tears filled her eyes, but she held his gaze. "Because I made a promise. Because I thought you were worth keeping it." She left before he could answer, her footsteps echoing through the marble hall. Inside the ballroom, the music played on, but for the first time, Ethan could not hear it. All he could feel was the hollow ache of something fragile cracking between them, something he had never meant to break but had lost all the same. The morning after the gala broke with gray skies, and silence heavy enough to feel like punishment. Clara woke to the sound of faint voices in the hallway, whispers, hurried footsteps, doors closing. Something had shifted in the house. When she stepped outside her room, Laura met her halfway, her expression uneasy. "Madam, Mr. Grant has been in meetings since dawn. The board demanded explanations about the rumors." Clara's heart sank. So it spread. Laura hesitated. "It always does." Downstairs, Ethan stood in his study, surrounded by files and a half-drained cup of coffee. He looked exhausted, his tie loose, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. When he saw her, his expression hardened out of habit. "You should not be here right now," he said quietly. "I have every right to be here," she replied. "This is my life too." He closed the folder in front of him. "The press is asking questions about your sister. About why the wedding was never postponed. They think the marriage was a cover for a merger." "And what do you think?" she asked. He hesitated, which told her everything. Her voice broke. "You think I planned this? That I tricked you into saving my family?" "I do not know what to think," he admitted, his voice low but sharp. "Everything about this marriage was built on lies, Clara. I just did not realize how many belonged to you." Her breath caught, her eyes stinging. "You were the one who said this was only a contract. I was never allowed to tell the truth." Before he could respond, a phone buzzed on the desk. He answered, listened for a moment, then said flatly, "Handle it." When he hung up, he looked at her. "The board is calling for an emergency vote. They want me to step aside until the scandal is managed." She whispered, "Because of me." He did not answer. She turned toward the door. "Then I will make it easy for you, Clara," he said. But she was already walking away. Her steps steady, even as her heart splintered with everyone. Hours later, her luggage sat near the front door. Laura stood quietly beside her, tears in her eyes. "Are you sure about this?" Clara nodded. "Tell him I will not destroy what he built. Tell him I kept my promise." She left the key to her room on the table and stepped into the rain. The city waited outside, gray and wide and cruelly indifferent. She had nothing but a small suitcase and the sketchbook clutched to her chest. At a bus stop near the river, she sat alone under a cracked glass shelter. The ink on the sketchbook cover had smudged, but the words were still there. "Every empire begins with a sketch." She opened it, staring at the drawing she had made of Ethan. The lines seemed almost alive, each one carrying more truth than their entire marriage. She whispered, "Goodbye, Ethan," and closed it gently. Back at the mansion, Ethan stood by the window, rain blurring the glass. On the table behind him lay a note written in delicate script. "You said love is not for sale. You were right. That is why I am leaving before I forget it." He read it twice, then again, each time feeling the weight of his own blindness. For the first time, the house felt as empty as it truly was. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Ethan turned away from the window, realizing too late that the silence she left behind was the loudest sound he had ever heard. 2 weeks passed before Ethan found the courage to open the door to Clara's empty room. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, soft and distant, like a memory that refused to leave. On the desk lay the broken frame of a sketch she had been working on, the unfinished outline of a man standing beneath rain. He touched the edge of the paper, realizing for the first time how much of her he had overlooked. Outside, his world began to crumble. The board demanded his resignation. Investors withdrew their trust. Headlines read, "The Grant marriage scandal, a union built on lies." He faced the press with a calm mask, but every word felt like another blade cutting through the life he had built. One night, Laura entered his office quietly. "Sir," she said, setting down a small envelope. "This came for you. No return address." He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a check written in Clara's name, made out to the Grant Foundation. Beneath it, A short note. For the children's fund. It was never about money. His chest tightened. Do you know where she is? He asked. Laura shook her head. Only that she asked for nothing. After she left, Ethan sat in the dark for a long time. For years he had prided himself on control, on never letting emotion dictate his choices. Now all that control felt like a cage he had built himself. He reached for his phone and called his attorney. I need every file. From the wedding contract. I want to know who arranged it, who forced her into it, and why. It took only a few days before the truth surfaced: emails, financial transfers, letters from her father to his legal team. It had all been a negotiation. Clara had been nothing more than a pawn to save the Evans family from ruin. She had been the only one who gained nothing from the deal. Ethan felt the ground give way beneath him. He had accused the only person who had stayed honest. He spent the next morning driving through the city, retracing the paths she once mentioned: the cafe on Main Street, the art store near the pier, the small park she said reminded her of freedom. No one had seen her. Each place felt colder for her absence. By dusk, he stopped at the riverfront bus stop. Rain began to fall again, just as it had the day they married. On the bench beneath the cracked shelter, a woman had left behind a folded napkin with pencil marks across it. He unfolded it with trembling hands. It was her handwriting, faint but clear. Do not chase me. Just be better than the world that broke us. He closed his eyes, pressing the paper to his chest. I am sorry, Clara, he whispered. I see you now. That night he called a press conference, not to defend himself but to tell the truth. This marriage began as a contract, he said to the cameras, his voice steady but raw. But the woman I married showed me what integrity looks like. I failed her. I failed all of you by pretending that love is a weakness. It is not. When the broadcast ended, he sat in silence. The city lights reflected in the glass, like distant stars. He knew that words would not bring her back. But for the first time, he did not want to hide behind silence or pride. Somewhere beyond the city, Clara might have heard the echo of his confession. And though neither of them knew it yet, that single act of truth was the beginning of something that still had a chance to heal. It had been 1 month since the night Ethan Grant's public confession aired on every major news network. His words had stirred both outrage and respect. Some called him a fool for risking his empire. Others called him brave for finally telling the truth. But for Ethan, none of it mattered. He was not trying to win back the public. He was trying to win back his soul. In the weeks that followed, he redirected his wealth into something Clara once dreamed aloud: the community arts center she had sketched in her notebook. The building had stood empty for years at the corner of Willow and Fifth Avenue, its walls covered in fading graffiti. Under his direction, construction began quietly. He named it the Clara Evans Center for Art and Hope. Every morning, he visited the site, watching the workers repaint the walls and hang the sign. Each brushstroke felt like a small act of redemption. One gray afternoon, as the final touches were being made, he stood in the main hall where the first exhibition would be held. The sunlight spilled through the tall windows, catching the dust in soft beams. In the center of the room hung her original sketchbook, framed behind glass. Below it was a small plaque engraved with her words. Every empire begins with a sketch. The grand opening drew a modest crowd: students, artists, local families. Ethan spoke briefly, his tone humble. This center is not just a building. It is a promise to create, to forgive, and to begin again. When the applause faded, he stepped aside and let the guests wander through the exhibits. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet peace. Then, as he turned toward the gallery entrance, his heart stilled. Clara stood there, dressed simply in a cream coat, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked almost the same, and yet different. Stronger. Freer. The crowd around her seemed to blur as she walked slowly toward him. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she said softly, "You used my name." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is yours." It always was. She looked around the room, taking in the sketches, the laughter of children painting in the corner. "You built this?" "For you," he said. "And for every person who was ever silenced. I wanted the world to see what I should have seen sooner." Her eyes glistened. "You did not have to do this." "I did," he replied, "because I was wrong. About the contract. About love. About you. Silence lingered, heavy with everything they had left unsaid. Then Clara took a slow breath. "You said once that love is not for sale. I believed you. That is why I left." "I know," he said, "but I am not asking you to come back to a contract. I am asking if we can start again. No conditions, no signatures, just truth." The tears she had held back finally fell. She nodded once. "Then start by walking with me." He smiled, relief breaking through the quiet ache. "Always." They walked together through the gallery, surrounded by light, color, and the soft murmur of people creating again. For the first time since the day she had left, Ethan did not feel like a man haunted by regret. He felt like a man forgiven, and in the soft hum of the art center that carried her name, Clara finally believed that some beginnings are worth the wait. The following spring arrived with sunlight that spilled over the glass roof of the Clara Evans Center for Art and Hope. Flowers bloomed along the front walkway, and the sound of laughter echoed from the open doors. It had been 6 months since that afternoon when Clara and Ethan met again, and since then, their lives had quietly intertwined once more. No contracts, no obligations, only the steady rhythm of forgiveness turning into something real. Inside the main gallery, a new exhibition was being unveiled. Clara stood at the center, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to cut the ribbon. Beside her stood Ethan, no longer the guarded millionaire but a man softened by truth. The sign above the display read, "The Art of Beginning Again." As the ribbon fell, applause filled the room. Reporters snapped photographs, but this time the flashes did not sting. They felt like light instead of judgment. Clara turned to Ethan and smiled. "You know," she said softly, "for a man who once swore off love, you have done quite a romantic thing." He smiled back. "I suppose I finally learned that the only contract worth keeping is the one made with the heart." Later that evening, when the guests had left, they walked through the quiet hall together. The moonlight spilled across the marble floor, touching the framed sketchbook that had started it all. Clara stopped in front of it, her fingers brushing the glass. "I never thought this little book would change anything," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer. "It changed everything. It changed me." She turned toward him, eyes glistening in the pale light. "And what now?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out the ring she had once worn during their false wedding, the symbol of a contract that had ended in heartbreak. But this time, there was no audience, no paper, no agenda, only 2 people who had learned how to tell the truth. He knelt, his voice quiet but certain. "Clara Evans, will you marry me for real this time? No terms, no timelines, just love, as imperfect and honest as it can be." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "1,000 times, yes." He rose, slipping the ring onto her finger, and she laughed softly through her tears. The laughter echoed through the gallery, blending with the faint music that played from the speakers. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the river, just as they had on the night they first met. Only now the rain was gone, replaced by a warm breeze carrying the scent of spring. As they stepped out onto the terrace, Ethan wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "Strange," he said quietly. "It started as a lie." Clara leaned into him, her voice gentle, "and became the most truthful thing we have ever known." They stood there together beneath the stars, 2 souls who had crossed the bridge between duty and love, between regret and redemption. In the reflection of the tall windows behind them, the words engraved on the plaque gleamed softly. "Every empire begins with a sketch." But this time, the empire was not built on wealth or status. It was built on forgiveness, on courage, and on the kind of love that no contract could ever contain. The story that had begun in rain ended in light, and for Ethan and Clara Grant, it was not the end at all, only the beginning of forever.